Welcome back to Background Historian. Tonight we will take a dive into the history and legend of the Aztec Empire. Close your eyes, if you haven't already. Let us go back, not just centuries, but through layers of time and memory, to a place where legends walked alongside men. A land of lakes and mountains, temples and thunder, where fire and rain were sacred, and the earth itself was alive with meaning. We begin not with cities, but with a story. A myth, really. One carried like a heartbeat through generations. The Aztecs, or as they called themselves, the Mexica, were not always mighty. Once, they were wanderers. Their origin story begins at a place called Aztlan, a semi-mythical homeland said to lie far to the north. The Mexica left this place long ago, led by priests and sacred visions, under the guidance of their war god Huitzilopochtli. According to the prophecy, they were to settle where they would see an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent. And so, they wandered. Through deserts. Past volcanoes. Across rivers. They were not powerful then. They were looked down upon by settled peoples. Denied land. Forced to labor. But always, they moved forward. They had something others did not. A dream. A promise. Eventually, their journey brought them to the Valley of Mexico, a lush, high-altitude basin surrounded by volcanoes and lakes. Other city-states thrived here, the Tepanecs, the Texcocans, the once great shadows of Teotihuacan long gone. And in the middle of this watery plain? A small, swampy island in Lake Texcoco. It was here, in the year 1325, that the Mexica saw it. An eagle. A cactus. A snake. The sign. And so, with mud on their feet and the sky wide above, they began to build Tenochtitlan. Not an empire. Not yet. Just a home. Their beginnings were humble. They were not the dominant force. Far from it. They paid tribute to stronger neighbors. They survived on chinampas, floating gardens they built from mud, reeds, and ingenuity. They hunted ducks, fished the lakes, prayed to many gods. And slowly, ever so slowly, they grew. Religion infused everything. The gods of the Mexica were not distant, they were near, hungry, alive in the sun and stars, the wind and bones. There was Tlaloc, god of rain, his breath in every storm. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, god of wisdom and wind. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, god of fate and night. And at the center, Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war, the force that demanded sacrifice to keep the cosmos in motion. This was a world where life and death danced close. Where blood fed the sun, and time moved in cycles. Time passed. Decades came and went, and the small, swampy island of Tenochtitlan began to change. The Mexica, once ridiculed as lowly and barbaric, were becoming something new, something that drew both fear and awe from their neighbors. They had learned how to survive in a landscape not meant for kings. And now, they were learning how to rule. In the early 1400s, a shift occurred. One that would echo across all of Mesoamerica. The Mexica formed a powerful alliance with two other city-states, Texcoco and Tlacopan. Together, they became known as the Triple Alliance. But make no mistake, Tenochtitlan was the beating heart. They moved swiftly. City after city, kingdom after kingdom, fell under their growing dominion. Sometimes they conquered with war. Sometimes with tribute. Sometimes with sheer intimidation. But always, they expanded. And with each victory, Tenochtitlan grew, its canals winding like veins, its markets buzzing with traders, its temples rising like mountains of stone. By the mid-15th century, Tenochtitlan was one of the largest cities in the world. Yes, the world. With a population that may have rivaled Paris or Constantinople, the city stood on an island, connected by great causeways and filled with majestic temples, wide causeways, zoos, gardens, and towering pyramids. Imagine it! White stucco walls glowing under the sun, canoes gliding through canals, and the ever-present hum of markets, prayers, and daily life. The Great Temple, or Templo Mayor, dominated the skyline, a twin pyramid dedicated to Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli. One side for rain, the other for war. Together, they mirrored the balance the Mexica sought to keep the world alive. But beneath the beauty lay a truth many modern ears find difficult. This was a civilization built, in part, on sacrifice. The Mexica believed the sun needed nourishment to rise each day. And that nourishment came in the form of blood, especially from warriors captured in battle. To us, this may sound brutal. And it was. But to them, it was cosmic duty. It was not cruelty for cruelty's sake, it was survival on a universal scale. They believed they were holding the world together, one heartbeat at a time. Yet life was not all altars and conquest. In the streets of Tenochtitlan, bakers prepared tortillas on stone griddles. Women wove intricate textiles from cotton and maguey fiber. Children learned songs, stories, and the responsibilities of their caste. There were merchants called Pochteca, who traveled vast distances trading cacao, jade, obsidian, and feathers. There were farmers tending chinampas, priests reading omens, and warriors training for the next campaign. Everyone had a place, a role, a purpose. If you stood at the top of Templo Mayor on a clear morning, you might see all of Lake Texcoco shimmer below you. Villages on the shore. Distant mountains ringed in mist. And in that moment, maybe, just maybe, you'd feel what the Mexica felt. That they stood at the very center of the world. The city was no longer just a city. Tenochtitlan had become a world unto itself, a living symbol of Aztec might and divine favor. Its rulers were not just kings, but sacred intermediaries. Priest warriors, chosen to guide the Mexica people through a world balanced precariously between sun and shadow. And among these rulers, two names would stand above the rest, Moctezuma I and his later namesake, Moctezuma II. Let us begin with the first. Moctezuma I, who reigned from 1440 to 1469, was not just a conqueror, he was an architect of empire. Under his rule, the empire expanded aggressively. Tribute flowed into Tenochtitlan from hundreds of cities and regions, enriching not only the elite but the temples, the schools, and the warriors. But Moctezuma I also saw beyond conquest. He established formal education systems, yes, education, for noble children and even commoners. Schools called Karmikak and Telpochcali trained young boys in history, warfare, agriculture, and the duties of being a citizen of the empire. He built aqueducts to bring fresh water into the city. Canals were deepened. New temples were raised. And behind it all pulsed a relentless devotion to order, discipline, and the gods. The title of the ruler was Tlatoani, meaning he who speaks. He was both a king and a priest. His words were law, but his role was heavy. He had to listen to omens, consult the gods, keep the sun rising, and ensure enough sacrifices to maintain balance in the cosmos. A lonely position, perhaps, but one wrapped in divine authority. By the late 15th century, the Aztec Empire reached its peak. From the Gulf Coast to the Pacific, the empire stretched far and wide. Armies marched with obsidian clubs and jaguar pelts. Tribute arrived in the form of gold, cacao, feathers, and laboras. Tenochtitlan was a marvel. Causeways thrumming with foot traffic, marketplaces brimming with maize and chilies, ball courts echoing with the bounce of the Uli rubber ball. Foreign merchants traveled just to witness its splendor. It was, in the eyes of many, invincible. Then came Moctezuma II, crowned in 1502. He was no simple warrior king. He was deeply spiritual, perhaps too much so. He surrounded himself with astrologers and priests, reading signs, interpreting dreams, seeking messages in the stars. He expanded the empire further, yet with each new conquest came unrest. The provinces grew weary of tribute. Resistance simmered. And as Moctezuma gazed skyward for guidance, the skies began to respond, in troubling ways. The chronicles say that omens appeared before the Spanish arrival. A strange flame in the sky. A temple struck by lightning. A lake boiling without wind. Voices in the night whispering of doom. A bird with a mirror in its chest, where Moctezuma claimed to see men riding beasts from the east. Were these true? Were they added later? We may never know. But we do know this. Moctezuma began to fear. Not just for his throne, but for the world itself. Imagine walking the sacred causeway on a calm night, the lake reflecting stars like shards of obsidian. Templo Mayor looms ahead, still warm from the day's rituals. The air smells of maize, burning copal, and salt. Then, a whisper, carried on the lake breeze. Not in your ear, but in your soul. Change is coming. And you don't yet know what it means. The year was 1519. In the eastern sea, where the sun rose, strange sails were spotted. Tall ships, like floating mountains, drew near the Gulf Coast. On board were men clad in iron, wielding sticks that spat fire, and beasts no one had ever seen, horses. They came not just with weapons, but with ambition, greed, religion, and an unfamiliar hunger for dominion. Their leader was Hernan Cortés. Cortés landed near Vera Cruz, establishing alliances with local peoples, many of whom resented the Aztec tribute system. Among these were the Tlaxcalans, fierce warriors who had long resisted Mexica rule. To the Spanish, the Aztecs were just another conquest. But to the Mexica, the Spanish were something entirely foreign, perhaps even divine. Some believe Moctezuma II wondered, could this be the return of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent? A god exiled long ago? Was this conquest destiny? As Cortés marched inland, he was greeted not with war, but gifts. Gold, feathered cloaks, cacao beans. Perhaps the Aztecs thought to appease these strangers. But Cortés only saw one thing in those gifts: weakness. He pushed onward. By the time the Spanish reached Tenochtitlan, they were flanked not by dozens, but thousands. Native allies, warriors from conquered cities, enemies of the Aztec throne. And what they saw astounded them. Even Cortés, hard, ruthless, battle-worn, was humbled. The city was larger than Seville, he said. The causeways, the canals, the markets. It was more organized, more advanced than most European cities. Fresh water flowed from aqueducts. The city gleamed white in the sun. Great pyramids rose beside lakeside gardens. And at the center, the emperor's palace, where Moctezuma waited. He greeted Cortés with dignity, with honor. He gave gifts, spoke with care, offered peace. Perhaps he hoped diplomacy would preserve balance. But the balance was already crumbling. The Spanish made themselves at home, guests who never intended to leave. They studied the city, counted the guards, measured the treasure. Tensions rose. Eventually, Cortés seized Moctezuma himself, holding him hostage in his own palace. It was a masterstroke of manipulation and a breaking point. When the Mexico realized their emperor was no longer free, their patience ended. Fighting broke out. The Spanish tried to flee with stolen gold under cover of darkness. But the Aztecs were ready. Bridges were destroyed. Arrows flew from rooftops. Warriors leapt into canals. Hundreds of Spaniards and allies drowned, their stolen gold weighing them down. The Spanish called it La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. But it was not the end. Cortés regrouped. He raised a new army, built ships to cross Lake Texcoco, and returned with vengeance. The siege of Tenochtitlan began in 1521. For 93 days, the city starved. Disease, especially smallpox, brought by the Spanish, ravaged the population. The canals ran red. Temples were bombarded. And finally, Tenochtitlan fell. What had once been the jewel of the Americas was reduced to rubble. Moctezuma was dead, either stoned by his own people or murdered by the Spanish. His successor, Cuauhtémoc, fought bravely but was eventually captured. The Mexica Empire was over. In its place, the Spanish built Mexico City, atop the ruins of what had once been the center of an extraordinary world. Tenochtitlan may have fallen. Its temples torn down. Its causeways flooded. Its people scattered. But the story of the Aztecs did not end in 1521. It transformed. It folded into new shapes, hidden behind colonial walls, whispered through generations, passed hand to hand like seeds buried in dry earth, waiting to grow again. Not all perished. Many Aztecs survived the conquest. Some were enslaved, yes. Others blended into the new Spanish world as farmers, traders, and artisans. But they carried with them memories of songs, of sacred days, of old gods whose names could no longer be spoken in the open. They taught their children the Nahuatl language. They cooked their tamales wrapped in corn leaves just as their ancestors had. They looked to the sun each morning and remembered a time when that star needed their blood to rise. Even in silence, they endured. Nahuatl, once the imperial language of a mighty empire, is still spoken today. Over 1 million people across Mexico carry its rhythms on their tongues. Words like chocolate, tomato, coyote, and avocado come from Nahuatl. Words we speak in English, every day, without realizing we're echoing a lost world. Every syllable is a thread that connects us backward through time, to farmers on floating gardens, to priest astronomers gazing at Venus, to warriors chanting before dawn. The Aztecs were more than warriors and sacrifice. They had astronomers who tracked the heavens with precision. Engineers who designed aqueducts and floating farms. Artists who worked in feathers, obsidian, and gold with a delicacy rivaling the finest courts of Europe or Asia. They had schools, laws, public services, medicine, trade networks that stretched from the Yucatan to modern-day Arizona. They cultivated a vision of balance between nature and civilization, between the sun and the rain, between the gods and the people. Their religion was rich with meaning. They saw the world as born from sacrifice and sustained by sacrifice. They believed time moved in cycles, that destruction led to renewal, and that even death was not an end but a return. To them, the world had already ended for times before. We live, they said, in the fifth sun, a fragile moment in time that must be cherished, honored, and protected. It was both terrifying and comforting. Like knowing the candle will go out, and still choosing to light it anyway. If you stood today in Mexico City, you would find the ruins of Templo Mayor still there, tucked between cathedrals and office buildings. You might sit among the stones. Close your eyes. And if you listen, really listen, you might hear something faint. The call of a conch shell. The beat of bare feet on temple steps. A market seller laughing. A child chanting a Nahuatl poem. And you might feel, not sorrow, but awe. Not loss, but presence. Because the Aztecs, though conquered, were never truly erased. They live in the land. In the food. In the language. In the very heartbeat of modern Mexico. So now, as you lay your head down, let your thoughts drift through ancient canals. Imagine floating past blooming flowers, past stone pyramids kissed by sun, past a people who lived with reverence for the sky and for the gods within it. The Aztecs did not vanish. They became story. And as long as we remember them, they remain. Still breathing. Still watching. Still dreaming beneath the stars. Now let's explore some interesting facts surrounding life in the Aztec Empire, and everything that came with being a part of civilization there. Let's dive into it. 1. Tenochtitlan was built on a lake. The grand Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, was built on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. Its canals, bridges, and causeways gave it a Venice-like feel, and it supported over 200,000 people at its height, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time. 2. The Aztecs had floating gardens. To grow crops on swampy land, the Aztecs engineered chinampas, floating gardens made of woven reeds and mud. These little islands were highly productive and helped feed the entire city. 3. Chocolate was sacred. Cacao beans were not just for drinking, though the Aztecs loved their spicy, bitter chocolate drinks. They also used cacao as currency, and the beans were often reserved for warriors, priests, and nobles. 4. They didn't have iron or the wheel. Despite their architectural and agricultural brilliance, the Aztecs never developed iron tools or made practical use of the wheel. They built entire pyramids and temples using stone tools and human labor. 5. Human sacrifice was common, but complex. Yes, the Aztecs practiced human sacrifice, but not out of cruelty. They believed it was necessary to feed the sun, which required life energy, called tonali, to rise each day. It was tied deeply to their religion and understanding of balance. 6. The sun needed help rising. According to Aztec belief, we live in the fifth sun, a world that exists only because the gods sacrificed themselves to ignite it. Without offerings, they feared the sun would fall from the sky, and time itself would end. 7. They had public education. The Aztecs had one of the earliest known mandatory education systems in the world. Boys and girls of all social classes were educated, nobles in the Kamicac, commoners in the Telpoch Cali. 8. They had a form of democracy. Kind of. The Aztec emperor, or Tlatoani, wasn't born into power. He was chosen by a council of nobles based on merit, leadership, and military success. It was a theocratic aristocracy with a surprisingly complex selection process. 9. Corn was everything. Maize, corn, was considered sacred. It wasn't just food, it was life. One of their gods, Sentiotl, was the god of maize, and nearly every meal involved some form of corn, tortillas, tamales, or atole. 10. Their calendar was scarily accurate. The Aztecs used a 365-day solar calendar and a 260-day ritual calendar, interlocking like gears. These guided everything from religious ceremonies to agricultural planting, down to the exact day. 11. They had a marketplace with tens of thousands of shoppers. The main market in Tlatelolco, a sister city to Tenochtitlan, was so massive that up to 60,000 people gathered there daily. Spanish conquistadors were stunned by its size, organization, and the variety of goods. 12. The Aztecs had their own police and court system. Laws were strictly enforced. The Aztecs had judges, lawyers, and even a type of police force to maintain order. Punishments could be harsh, ranging from fines to exile or even execution, but justice was a structured affair. 13. Nobles were held to higher standards. If a commoner and a noble committed the same crime, the noble was punished more harshly. The logic? Nobles were supposed to lead by example. A refreshing twist on accountability, isn't it? 14. They practiced skull racks. The Aztecs displayed the skulls of war captives on massive wooden frames called tzompantli. These were both religious symbols and warnings to would-be enemies: cross us, and you'll join the wall. 15. Aztec warriors earned titles like Jaguar and Eagle. Elite warriors were honored with fierce animal titles. Jaguar warriors wore spotted pelts and fought bravely, while Eagle warriors donned feathered helms and represented the sun. These were not just symbolic, they were elite military ranks. 16. Poetry was a huge part of Aztec culture. They didn't just fight and build, they composed. Aztec nobles wrote poetry about love, war, death, flowers, and dreams. One famous philosopher-poet, Nezahualcóyotl, was also a king. 17. They had zoos and botanical gardens. Emperor Moctezuma II maintained a zoo filled with jaguars, monkeys, birds, and even snakes. He also had elaborate gardens with exotic plants and medicinal herbs, carefully tended by specialists. 18. Featherwork was a high art. Aztec artisans created breathtaking robes, headdresses, and shields using feathers from birds like the quetzal. Some feather capes and fans were considered more valuable than gold. 19. They had no currency but used barter and cacao. There were no coins in Aztec markets. Instead, people traded using goods, and cacao beans often served as a common medium of exchange. You could literally buy food with chocolate. 20. They believed the world had been destroyed 4 times already. Their mythology spoke of 5 suns, 5 ages of creation and destruction. The previous worlds had ended by wind, fire, jaguars, and floods. We live, they believed, in the 5th sun, which could end at any moment. 21. Aztec children had chores, a lot of them. From a young age, Aztec children were expected to fetch water, sweep the home, and help in the fields. No cartoons, no snacks, just work, and maybe a little bit of storytelling at the end of the day. 22. Their temples were painted bright colors. The great temples of the Aztecs weren't bare gray stone. They were painted in vivid reds, blues, yellows, and whites, with images of gods, serpents, and celestial patterns. Imagine ancient pyramids that looked more like Technicolor dreams. 23. The Aztecs had a god of filth. Among the many gods, one was Tlaxtetl, the goddess of filth, vice, and purification. People would confess their worst deeds to her priests and be forgiven. A spiritual do-over, 15th century style. 24. They had a ball game with high stakes. The Mesoamerican ball game, called Lamaliztli, involved bouncing a heavy rubber ball through stone hoops using only hips, elbows, and knees. It was a serious religious event. Some losing teams may have been sacrificed, so yeah, no pressure. 25. Warriors advanced by taking captives, not killing. Aztec warfare emphasized capturing enemies rather than killing them. A successful warrior was judged by how many captives they brought back for ritual sacrifice. Strange, but deeply rooted in their cosmology. 26. They had an herb for nearly every ailment. Aztec doctors used hundreds of medicinal herbs to treat everything from fevers to snake bites. They even practiced dentistry, wound stitching, and bone setting. Their pharmacology was way ahead of its time. 27. Music was everywhere. Music wasn't just for fun, it was sacred. The Aztecs used drums, rattles, flutes, and conch shells in rituals. Musicians and dancers performed in temples, markets, and ceremonies, invoking divine energy through rhythm. 28. Aztec names had meaning. Names weren't random. A child born during a rainstorm might be named Latiel, meaning water. A warrior might be Cuauhtémoc, descending eagle. Every name reflected nature, character, or destiny. 29. Women had important roles. Aztec women weren't sidelined. They worked as weavers, traders, midwives, and even priestesses. Some were also trained in healing arts or owned land. Noble women could wield significant influence behind the scenes. 30. The Aztec Empire was only around for about 200 years. Despite its cultural power, the actual empire lasted only from circa 1325 to 1521. That's shorter than the US has been a country, but its impact still echoes through modern language, food, and belief systems. 31. The Aztecs had a god just for nighttime travel. Meet Tezcatlipoca, the god of the night sky, destiny, and sorcery. His name means smoking mirror, and he was often depicted with a black obsidian mirror in place of one of his feet. Travelers and warriors feared him on dark roads, and many whispered prayers to avoid his gaze. 32. They brushed their teeth with charcoal and salt. Dental hygiene wasn't forgotten. Aztecs made tooth cleaning powders from charcoal, salt, and even crushed bones. They also chewed on aromatic tree resin for fresh breath, basically ancient chewing gum. 33. Aztec diets were mostly vegetarian. Despite the warrior image, most Aztecs didn't eat much meat. Their diets were rich in beans, corn, squash, chili peppers, tomatoes, and amaranth. Meat was a luxury, often reserved for nobles or rituals. 34. They practiced ritual bloodletting. Sacrifice wasn't always deadly. Many Aztecs, especially priests and rulers, practiced auto-sacrifice, piercing their ears, tongues, or limbs to offer drops of blood to the gods. Pain, in their view, was a form of devotion. 35. their warriors wore war paint and headdresses. Before battle, Aztec warriors adorned themselves with bright body paint, feathers, and animal pelts, not just for flair, but to invoke the power of the creatures they represented, like jaguars or eagles. 36. They played a kind of capture the flag. In military training, young Aztec men often played strategic games that mimicked real combat. Some involved capturing a flag from the opposing team without being tagged or caught. Training through games, smart and fun. 37. Tenochtitlan had streetlights. No electricity, but light? Yes. The city used torches on tall poles to illuminate streets at night, especially near temples and busy marketplaces. Not bad for a 14th-century city built on a lake. 38. The Aztecs had a god of wind, who was also a priest. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was a god of wind, learning, and priesthood. He was associated with creation and knowledge, basically the patron of peaceful progress, quite the contrast to the war gods. 39. Death was not always feared. The Aztecs didn't see death as an ending, but a transformation. Dying in childbirth, battle, or sacrifice was believed to send the soul to a special afterlife. Others were reincarnated as birds or butterflies. 40. The Spanish were mistaken for returning gods. Some sources suggest that when the Spanish arrived, they were mistaken for returning deities, especially Cortés, who may have been linked to Quetzalcoatl. Whether myth or manipulation, it played into the psychological strategy of conquest. 41. Aztec houses were made of mud and stone. Most Aztecs lived in small one-room homes built from adobe, mud bricks, thatched roofs, and volcanic stone. They often had a central fire pit, a few woven mats for sleeping, and a grinding stone for making tortillas. 42. They had public bathhouses called temazcals. The temazcal was a sweat lodge used for ritual purification, healing, and even post-battle recovery. These sauna-like structures were filled with steam and herbs, a mix of relaxation and spirituality. 43. Aztec warriors had strict training from childhood. Boys destined for military life entered Telpoch-Cali schools around age 15. There, they learned discipline, carried firewood, did laborious tasks, and eventually trained with wooden weapons until ready for real battle. 44. They kept detailed codices, before the Spanish burned most of them. Aztec scribes used deer hide and bark paper to create colorful illustrated books called codices, recording everything from history to astronomy. Sadly, most were destroyed by conquistadors, but a few still survive today. 45. The Aztecs had a 13-level heaven and a 9-level underworld. Their cosmology was incredibly rich. The heavens housed various gods, stars, and warriors, while the underworld, Mictlan, was a long journey of trials after death. You didn't get placed in one or the other for moral reasons, it depended on how you died. 46. The Aztecs had no beasts of burden. No horses. No oxen. No donkeys. Everything was transported by human labor, often using carrying slings or canoes along the lakes and canals of Tenochtitlan. 47. Aztec priests had hair rituals. Priests often wore their hair long and matted, letting it grow into tangled locks that symbolized their devotion. Cutting their hair marked the end of service or a break in their spiritual vows. 48. They used obsidian for surgical tools. Obsidian, a volcanic glass, was so sharp that it could be used for surgical incisions. Some studies say it's still sharper than modern steel scalpels. Nature's precision tool. 49. They celebrated over 18 festivals a year. Each Aztec month, of which there were 18, had its own religious festival, complete with music, dancing, costumes, feasts, and yes, sometimes sacrifices. These festivals kept their calendar and spirits lively. 50. Corn had its own goddess. Chicomicatl was the goddess of corn and sustenance. She was often depicted holding ears of maize and a rattle, embodying fertility and nourishment. Pretty fitting for a culture where corn was life itself. 51. Aztecs had a sacred flower world. In Aztec philosophy, flowers represented beauty, truth, and fleeting life. Poetry and flowers were often paired to symbolize spiritual connection. To die among flowers and songs was considered a good death. 52. They trained dancers as carefully as soldiers. Dancing wasn't just celebration, it was ritual. Dancers trained rigorously, learning complex choreographies meant to honor gods or reenact mythic stories. Some dances lasted all night under the moon. 53. Aztec nobles loved board games. One game, Patoli, was a kind of ancient backgammon involving beans used as dice and a cross-shaped board. Nobles gambled with luxury items, cloaks, food, even houses. It wasn't always so relaxing. 54. The Aztec Empire was a network of tribute states. Rather than conquer and destroy, the Aztecs often let local rulers stay in power, as long as they paid tribute in goods, labor, or captives. This strategy built an empire while reducing resistance. 55. They practiced astronomical observation. Priests observed the skies from temple tops, tracking solstices, equinoxes, and planetary movement. This helped them set dates for festivals, plant crops, and predict eclipses, which were considered bad omens. 56. Women ground corn for hours every day. The metate, a flat grinding stone, was a staple in every home. Women spent hours daily turning maize into dough for tortillas, a quiet, laborious rhythm that powered an empire. 57. They had their own creation story featuring a rabbit on the moon. According to legend, the gods once threw a rabbit into the moon as a gift to humanity, explaining the rabbit-shaped pattern visible in the moon's surface. A sweeter myth than many might expect. 58. Warriors could retire with land and privileges. Elite warriors who captured many enemies could earn land, public honors, and tax exemptions. Some were invited into noble houses or given wives as a reward. Retirement in style, if you survived. 59. They used chili for more than just flavor. Aztecs used chili peppers in medicine, warfare, as smoke bombs, and punishment. Naughty children were sometimes made to inhale chili smoke, basically the original spicy timeout. 60. Their temples were rebuilt in layers. Temples like the Templo Mayor weren't just built once. As each emperor rose to power, a new layer was added over the previous structure, like a pyramid of pyramids. Today, archaeologists peel back these layers like pages in history. 61. Aztec timekeeping was incredibly sophisticated. The Aztecs used two calendars simultaneously, the tonal Pohualli, a 260-day sacred calendar used for rituals, and the Zupohualli, a 365-day agricultural calendar. These interlocked like gears and repeated every 52 years in a sacred cycle. 62. The Aztecs believed the heart was the seat of the soul. In Aztec thought, the Tonali, the vital spirit, was located in the heart. This belief partly explains the ritual of heart sacrifice, the offering of one's deepest essence to the gods. 63. Aztec priests were expert mathematicians and astronomers. Beyond their spiritual roles, priests were also the empire's timekeepers and scholars. They calculated eclipses, tracked Venus's movements, and performed rituals based on complex mathematical predictions. 64. Children were taught through harsh discipline. Forget sticker charts. Aztec children could be pricked with cactus spines or forced to inhale chili smoke as punishment for laziness or disobedience. It sounds extreme now, but it reflected the era's focus on endurance and obedience. 65. Aztec slavery was not inherited. Slavery existed, but it wasn't racial or lifelong. A person could become a slave due to debt, punishment, or war, but they could also buy their freedom, marry a free person, or be freed by their owner. Their children were born free. 66. They had a goddess of salt. Her name was Huixtocihuatl, and she wasn't just a culinary figure. Salt was sacred and essential for preserving food and balancing rituals. Her temple stood near lakes where salt was harvested. 67. Cocoa was for the elite. While cacao beans were used as currency, chocolate drinks were reserved for nobility and warriors. Served cold, spiced with chili, and unsweetened, it was a bitter beverage meant to energize and symbolize status. 68. There were flower wars. The Xochiatl, or flower wars, were battles staged not for conquest, but for capturing prisoners to sacrifice. These wars were ritualistic, agreed upon by both sides, and helped maintain warrior honor and religious needs. 69. Aztec schools were free and mandatory, for boys. All boys, regardless of class, were required to attend school. Commoners went to Telpochcalli for military training, nobles went to Carmichac for priesthood and leadership. Girls were often educated at home in domestic and religious arts. 70. The empire fell in just 2 years. Despite centuries of rise, the Aztec Empire fell in just about 2 years, 1519 to 1521, after Hernan Cortés arrived. Disease, alliances against the Aztecs, and internal political unrest played enormous roles. It wasn't just the Spanish alone. 71. Aztec farmers used floating gardens called chinampas. To grow food in swampy lake regions, Aztec farmers built chinampas, small, rectangular floating gardens anchored by willow trees. These marvels of engineering could grow multiple crops a year and helped feed the massive population of Tenochtitlan. 72. They used mandibles as surgical staples. In emergency situations, Aztec doctors used large jaws to stitch wounds shut. They would make the ant bite the skin closed, then snap off the body, leaving the clamped mandibles in place as natural sutures. Nature, again, comes to the rescue. 73. Their word for book literally meant painted paper. Aztec books, or tlamoxtli, were usually folded like accordions and full of glyphs and pictures. The word reflects their beautiful hand-painted format. Sadly, most were destroyed by conquistadors. 74. Aztecs had a god of filth and excess. His name was Tezcatlipoca's darker aspect, Tlazalteotl, the goddess of filth, purification, and sin. People would confess to her priests and perform cleansing rituals to rid themselves of spiritual grime. 75. Music was central to worship. Music wasn't background noise. It was spiritual fuel. Drums, flutes, and shell trumpets accompanied festivals, sacrifices, and seasonal rites. Priests believed music pleased the gods and helped maintain cosmic balance. 76. Aztec roads were carefully maintained. The Aztecs had an impressive network of roads and relay runners called Painani who carried messages and goods. Some reports suggest they could carry fresh fish from the coast to the capital in a single day using this system. 77. They had a marketplace larger than many European cities. The Tlatelolco market, located near Tenochtitlan, was visited by over 60,000 people daily. There were entire sections for pottery, jewelry, fabrics, spices, tools, and food. Spanish chroniclers were stunned by the size and orderliness. 78. Turkeys were domesticated. Forget chickens, the Aztecs domesticated turkeys for their meat, feathers, and eggs. These birds were an important part of both diet and ritual, often adorned in festivals and feasts. 79. They had a deep fear of cosmic collapse. The Aztecs believed we lived in the fifth sun, a world preceded by 4 failed creations. They performed elaborate rituals to feed the sun with human energy, ensuring it would rise again. Every day was a fragile miracle in their cosmology. 80. The empire's legacy lives in Mexico's flag. The eagle eating a serpent atop a cactus, seen on the Mexican flag, is inspired by the Aztec origin story. It marks where Tenochtitlan was founded, and continues to represent strength, resilience, and heritage today. 81. Aztec warriors wore animal-themed armor. Warriors dressed in jaguar skins, eagle feathers, and crocodile motifs. The elite jaguar and eagle warriors not only wore these to intimidate their enemies but also to embody the spiritual power of these creatures. It was both fashion and fierce energy. 82. The empire had a postal system without horses. The Aztecs used relay runners to deliver messages and goods along a network of causeways and roads. Each runner would dash a short distance, pass the message, and return, kind of like the original express mail service, just with more callices. 83. Maize was a sacred gift from the gods. According to legend, the god Quetzalcoatl transformed himself into a black and to steal maize for humanity. Every cornmeal tortilla was a small act of sacred remembrance. 84. Aztec names had deep meaning. Names like Huitzilopochtli, hummingbird of the south, and Nezahualcóyotl, fasting coyote, weren't just poetic. They reflected destiny, status, or divine connection. Children were often named after the day they were born on the ritual calendar. 85. The empire was governed from a lake. Tenochtitlan was a city on an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, connected by causeways and filled with canals. Some chroniclers called it the Venice of the New World, with canoes gliding past floating markets and temples. 86. Some Aztec warriors took vows of silence. Certain warrior societies would take vows of silence as a spiritual discipline. They communicated through hand signals and gestures, believed to increase mental strength and sharpen the senses before battle. 87. Aztecs used rubber balls for games and rituals. They played Tlachtli, a ball game using solid rubber balls. Losing teams, or individual players, were sometimes sacrificed, especially if the game had ritual meaning. That really raised the stakes. Imagine if pick-up basketball came with that consequence. 88. They practiced dental decoration. Nobles sometimes had jade or turquoise inlays embedded in their teeth, both as decoration and status symbols. These were polished smooth and inserted with surprising surgical precision. 89. They had over 1,000 gods and goddesses. From Xipe-Totec, the god of flayed skin, to Xochipilli, the flower prince of love and games, the Aztec pantheon was vast and specific. There was a deity for nearly every profession, crop, and natural force. 90. Aztec temples were painted bright red and blue. Forget the dusty stone ruins we see today. Aztec temples and buildings were vividly painted in colors like cinnabar red, turquoise blue, and yellow ochre. The city must have looked like a massive jewel glittering under the sun. 91. Aztec birth rituals were elaborate and symbolic. When a child was born, the family held a naming ceremony 4 days later. If it was a boy, symbolic weapons were placed beside him. If it was a girl, weaving tools were laid near her. It was their way of gently introducing a newborn to life's purpose. 92. Aztec priests grew their hair long and never bathed in cold water. Priests let their hair grow into thick, matted cords and bathed only in cold water to maintain spiritual purity. Their uncut hair symbolized devotion, and they fasted often, living lives of intense self-discipline. 93. They had a word for people without a trade or purpose. The word Atlacatin originally meant slave, but socially, it could also apply to people who had no clear trade, skill, or function. In a highly organized society, having a role was considered part of one's honor and identity. 94. Festivals could last for days. Religious festivals honoring gods like Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc involved days of singing, dancing, mask-wearing, and offerings. Each month of the Aztec calendar had its own major celebration. That's 18 major festivals a year, plus smaller ceremonies. 95. The empire was a master of psychological warfare. Before battle, Aztec warriors would paint their faces, wear frightening costumes, and use whistles and drums to terrify their enemies. Some skull masks and obsidian weapons were designed to make attackers look like walking gods or demons. 96. Obsidian was sharper than steel. The Aztec macuahuitl, a wooden club lined with obsidian blades, could slice through flesh and even decapitate. Obsidian was prized not just for ritual use, but for making surgical and military tools, and it's still used in some modern surgical scalpels today. 97. They told stories through codices. Aztec books, called codices, were made of bark paper or deerskin and folded accordion style. They used pictograms and glyphs to record myth, genealogy, tribute, and even jokes. Though most were burned by Spanish conquerors, a few survive today. 98. Aztec women could own property and run businesses. Despite a patriarchal structure, Aztec women had significant rights. They could inherit land, run markets, and be healers or priestesses. A noblewoman could even become a political advisor or a midwife priestess known as a Cihuacotl. 99. The Aztecs measured time with a fifth sun belief. They believed the world had ended and restarted 4 times before, through jaguars, wind, fire, and floods. We're now living in the fifth sun, which they believed would end in earthquakes unless balance was constantly restored through ritual. 100. Tenochtitlan was more populous than most European cities. At its height, Tenochtitlan had a population of over 200,000, more than London, Paris, or Venice at the time. It had clean streets, public toilets, aqueducts, and a strict sanitation system that made European visitors marvel, and maybe blush a little. 101. Aztecs used saunas called temazcal. The temazcal was a type of sweat lodge used for healing and purification. People would pour water over heated volcanic rocks inside a small dome-shaped structure. It was used for everything from childbirth recovery to spiritual cleansing, kind of like an ancient spa with a cosmic twist. 102. Some warriors were tattooed with sacred symbols. Though tattoos weren't universal, elite warriors were sometimes inked with patterns representing their rank, god, or military accomplishments. These weren't decorative, they were deeply spiritual and identity-driven. 103. Aztecs used chili in medicine. Chili peppers were more than spice, they were medicine. Crushed chilies were used to relieve toothaches, clear sinuses, and even as a salve for sore muscles. And yes, inhaling chili smoke was also used as punishment for unruly children. 104. There were specialized merchant spies called Pochteca. The Pochteca were elite traders who traveled far across Mesoamerica, gathering not only luxury goods but intelligence for the empire. They were essentially merchant spies, blending economics with espionage. 105. Aztec nobles had feather capes that took years to make. Feather workers, or amanteca, crafted robes, headdresses, and shields from hummingbird, quetzal, and macaw feathers. The rarest feathers were more valuable than gold, and a single cape could take years to complete. 106. Aztec homes had altars inside. Most Aztec homes, even those of commoners, included a small altar where the family would honor deities or ancestors with offerings of food, flowers, or incense. Religion wasn't just public, it lived inside every home. 107. They had ritual clown priests. Some festivals included the appearance of a ritual clown figure, who would use humor and mischief to mock nobles or impersonate gods in a symbolic inversion of society. It was their version of comic relief. Sacred silliness with a purpose. 108. Aztec warriors captured, not killed. Unlike many armies, the goal of an Aztec warrior wasn't necessarily to kill, but to capture enemies alive for ritual sacrifice. Capturing more enemies brought higher honor and advancement through military ranks. 109. They used stone or bone tools to perform surgeries. Aztec healers could set bones, treat wounds, and even perform trepanation, removing part of the skull to relieve pressure. They sterilized instruments with herbs and heat, a surprising level of surgical knowledge for the time. 110. Aztec art often included hidden symbolism. Artworks, from murals to pottery, often carried coded meanings. A bird might symbolize war, a flower might represent sacrifice, and colors were rarely decorative. To the Aztecs, art was language, and nothing was random. 111. Aztecs used obsidian mirrors for divination. Priests and shamans believed they could see into the future using obsidian mirrors, polished to a dark, glassy sheen. These were associated with Tezcatlipoca, the god of night and sorcery, whose very name means smoking mirror. 112. Tenochtitlan had public bathrooms and waste disposal. Unlike many European cities at the time, Aztec cities had organized sanitation. Waste was collected in canoes and used as fertilizer, or sometimes sold. Public latrines were available near markets, hygienic and forward-thinking. 113. The empire was fueled by tribute, not taxes. Instead of money, conquered cities were required to pay tribute: corn, cotton, cacao, feathers, jade, obsidian, or slaves. Tribute lists were recorded in pictorial codices, and failure to deliver could mean war. 114. Aztecs valued stillness as a virtue. In their philosophy, Nepantla, being balanced between extremes, was ideal. Calmness, restraint, and measured words were considered signs of wisdom. A loudmouth warrior might win a fight, but a still soul won respect. 115. They had a unique symbol for the death by laughter. In Aztec codices, there's a glyph that shows someone dying from laughter, head thrown back, mouth wide open, with symbols of speech or sound coming out. Apparently, humor could literally be a killer. 116. Aztec judges were expected to be stone-faced. Judges sat on a stone seat of judgment and were expected to be utterly impartial and unemotional, like the stone they sat on. Bribery was severely punished, and court records were sometimes kept with pictographs. 117. Their calendar was a blend of sacred and solar cycles. The Aztecs used two main calendars, the tonal Pohualli, 260-day sacred calendar, and the Zupohualli, 365-day solar calendar. Every 52 years, they aligned, and during that century, people would extinguish their fires and await renewal ceremonies. 118. Human sacrifice wasn't always deadly. While some rituals involved death, others were symbolic or staged. In some ceremonies, bloodletting was done without killing, and in others, symbolic dummies or dough figures were offered in place of real people. 119. They had a god of old age and coldness. His name was Itztlacoatl, and he symbolized frost, punishment, and aging. He was often shown blindfolded with a bent back, a reminder that even the young and proud would one day grow old and slow. 120. The Aztecs believed dreams were messages from the gods. Dreams were taken seriously. Dream interpreters existed in the priesthood, and visions could guide decisions or foretell future danger. A dream of water might signal birth, a dream of fire, conflict. Every night's rest was, in a way, a visit with the divine. 141. Aztec children played educational games. Kids weren't just sent to school, they also played games that mimicked market trade, farming, and even warfare. These weren't just for fun, they were meant to prepare children for their adult roles in society. 142. The Aztecs had a flower war. Called Xochitl, or flower wars, these were prearranged battles between neighboring states, not to conquer, but to capture prisoners for sacrifice. They were both deadly and ceremonial, like a cosmic agreement between empires. 143. Aztecs loved miniature art. From tiny clay figurines to carved turquoise masks the size of a thumb, the Aztecs created intricate miniatures that captured daily life, animals, and gods. These often served as offerings or children's toys, sacred or simple. 144. Aztec priests grew their hair long. Priests, especially high-ranking ones, never cut their hair as a sign of devotion. Their long, matted locks symbolized their lifelong service to the gods, and they were instantly recognizable in both temples and daily life. 145. Aztec cooks used steam and clay pots. In addition to fire-grilled meals, Aztec cuisine often involved steaming food using clay pots and maguey leaves. This method kept dishes like tamales soft and warm, a practice still very much alive in modern Mexican kitchens. 146. The empire had sacred mountains. Mountains like Mount Tlaloc were seen as portals to the divine. Some were sites of human sacrifice, others were pilgrimage destinations. They believed rain gods lived inside them, making them holy and powerful. 147. Aztec nobles used turquoise as a status symbol. Turquoise wasn't just pretty, it was a mark of nobility and divine favor. Nobles wore it in nose rings, belts, and jewelry. Even their shields and ceremonial knives were inlaid with the blue stone of the gods. 148. Aztecs believed crooked teeth were beautiful. Straight white teeth weren't the ideal, some Aztecs filed their teeth or added gems to decorate them. But a slightly crooked smile was considered charming. Beauty standards, it seems, have always had their own rules. 149. They had storytellers known as tlaquilos. These weren't just artists, tlaquilos were scribe painters who recorded history, religion, and law through vibrant codices. They blended images and glyphs into complex narratives that preserved Aztec culture long after the empire fell. 150. Many Aztec temples were built on earlier civilization sites. When the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico, they found ruins from Toltec and Teotihuacan civilizations. Rather than destroy them, they often built on top, blending new with old, a literal and spiritual layering of history. 151. Aztec warriors had hair rules. Young warriors known as Telpoctli were not allowed to cut their hair until they had captured their first enemy in battle. This meant a warrior with a shaved head had earned his honor, while long hair meant he was still in training. 152. They used cacao beans as currency. Chocolate wasn't just a treat, it was money. A turkey might cost 100 cacao beans, while a tamale was just 1 or 2. It was so valuable that counterfeit cacao beans were made by filling empty shells with dirt, an ancient scam. 153. Aztec temples aligned with celestial events. Many temples were built to align with equinoxes and solstices. On specific days, the rising or setting sun would shine perfectly through temple doors or windows, marking sacred points in the Aztec calendar. 154. They believed in rebirth through nature. Aztec cosmology taught that souls were recycled, warriors might return as butterflies, mothers who died in childbirth became lightning, and others might rise again with the sun. Nature was the great wheel of rebirth. 155. Aztec homes had shrines inside. Even the humblest homes included a corner for offerings, often with small clay statues of household gods, candles, and incense burners. Family members would leave food, flowers, or prayers, making home a place of daily devotion. 156. Aztec dances had meaningful steps. Every move in ceremonial dances represented something: earth, wind, struggle, gratitude, the heartbeat of the gods. These dances weren't just entertainment, they were forms of prayer, each rhythm carrying symbolic power. 157. They had floating gardens called chinampas. One of the Aztecs' greatest innovations was the chinampa system, artificial islands built on shallow lake beds. These floating plots of fertile land could grow crops year-round, supporting Tenochtitlan's massive population. 158. Aztec women could own property and run businesses. Despite being a patriarchal society, Aztec women could inherit land, operate market stalls, and become healers, priestesses, or midwives. Some were highly respected for their economic independence and skills. 159. Their stories were passed down in songs and dramas. Aztec oral tradition was rich with epic songs and theatrical performances. These were often performed in marketplaces or religious festivals, where music, costumes, and storytelling brought myth and history to life. 160. The Aztec Empire had a new fire ceremony every 52 years. When both their calendars aligned, they feared the world might end. So every 52 years, all fires were extinguished across the empire. Then, priests lit a new fire atop a sacred hill. If the flame caught, the world would continue. Families relit their hearths from this divine flame. 161. Aztec markets had their own police. To maintain order in bustling markets like Tlatelolco, the Aztecs employed market judges and enforcers who watched for fraud, theft, and pricing scams. If you tried to shortchange someone, you might get a public scolding, or worse, a fine of cacao beans. 162. They used fire drills to start flames. Aztec households often made fire the traditional way, with a spindle-shaped stick twirled into a wooden base, creating friction and eventually a small ember. No lighters, no matches, just patient hands and the blessing of the fire god. 163. Aztecs decorated with bright feathers, but never killed the birds. Feather workers, known as Amanteca, were highly respected artisans. They created brilliant cloaks, fans, and shields using feathers from tropical birds like the quetzal. The birds were carefully plucked, not killed, a show of reverence for nature. 164. Tenochtitlan had public toilets and waste systems. In the capital, people relieved themselves in reed containers or canal-side huts. Human waste was collected and sold to farmers as fertilizer, an early form of waste recycling that kept the city surprisingly clean. 165. They made perfume from flowers and resin. Aztecs loved good smells. They used copal resin, crushed flowers, and even certain tree barks to create fragrant pastes worn behind the ears and on the wrists. These natural scents were considered offerings to the gods, and made you smell divine at festivals. 166. Aztecs had a god of twins. Named Xolotl, this god represented duality, deformity, and the evening star. He was the twin of Quetzalcoatl and was believed to guide the sun through the underworld at night. Twins were sometimes seen as sacred, and sometimes feared. 167. They created life-sized statues from dough. In some ceremonies, especially those honoring Huitzilopochtli, Aztecs made large statues from amaranth dough mixed with honey and blood. These edible idols were blessed, worshipped, and eventually broken apart and eaten. 168. Aztecs used rubber for balls and shoes. They extracted latex from Castilla elastica trees, mixing it with sap or other plant chemicals to make rubber. This was used to create bouncing balls, waterproof sandals, and even adhesives centuries before vulcanization. 169. Aztec marriage was a community affair. Weddings involved the extended family, a ceremonial matchmaker, and a ritual where the bride and groom's cloaks were tied together, symbolizing unity. There was feasting, music, and lots of tamales. Love was truly in the air. 170. They had a deep fear of eclipse events. Solar and lunar eclipses were seen as omens. During a lunar eclipse, pregnant women were told to hide indoors, lest the moon bite their unborn child. People made noise, chanted prayers, and offered food to calm the angry celestial spirits. 171. Aztecs made paper from trees. They crafted a strong, fibrous paper called amatl from the inner bark of the fig tree. It was used for books, rituals, and government records, often painted with vibrant pigments. Priests and scribes treasured these sheets as sacred communication tools. 172. The moon goddess was dismembered in myth. The Aztecs told the story of Quetzalcoatl, a moon goddess who tried to stop her brother Huitzilopochtli from being born. He emerged from their mother fully grown, and dismembered her. Her fragmented body is symbolized in stone carvings at the Templo Mayor. 173. Aztec houses were built from mud bricks and cane. Typical homes, or calli, were made from adobe bricks and reeds, with flat roofs where food could be dried and clothes could be aired. Despite their simplicity, homes were cool in the heat, warm at night, and often included small shrines to household gods. 174. Priests studied astronomy for religious calendars. Aztec priests weren't just spiritual leaders. They were also astronomers and mathematicians, keeping track of time using the tonal Pohuali, 260-day ritual calendar, and the Zupohuali, 365-day solar calendar. Eclipses, solstices, and planetary movements all guided rituals. 175. Aztecs believed croaking frogs were messages from the rain god. During the rainy season, frogs and toads were welcomed as messengers of Tlaloc, the rain deity. Their calls were seen as omens of a good harvest. Some frogs were even sculpted or offered in small clay jars at altars. 176. Priests practiced bloodletting rituals. To show devotion, Aztec priests, and sometimes rulers, performed auto-sacrifice, drawing blood from their earlobes, tongues, or even genitals. These offerings were believed to nourish the gods and keep cosmic order in balance. 177. Aztec warriors ate special energy cakes. Before long marches or battles, warriors consumed pinole, a mixture of roasted cornmeal, cacao, chia seeds, and honey. It was light, portable, and packed with energy, like an ancient protein bar for hardened soldiers. 178. Aztecs had a smoking mirror god. Tezcatlipoca, one of their most powerful deities, was often shown with a black obsidian mirror replacing one of his feet. This mirror symbolized night, fate, and reflection. His name literally means smoking mirror, and he was as feared as he was revered. 179. Flowers were sacred offerings. In Aztec poetry and ritual, flowers symbolized life, death, and the fleeting nature of beauty. Entire festivals were dedicated to flower offerings, and warriors returning from battle would wear garlands to honor the gods and the fallen. 180. The empire had an elaborate road and courier system. Aztec messengers, or painani, ran long distances using a relay system, delivering news, decrees, and tribute across the empire. Roads were lined with way stations and markers, and these runners could cover over 200 miles in a single day. 181. Aztecs had a sacred fire serpent. Known as Zucotl, this mythical creature was often depicted in turquoise mosaics and weapon carvings. It symbolized fire, drought, and war, and was believed to be wielded by the sun god as a burning weapon, a celestial flamethrower of sorts. 182. They had no horses until the Spanish arrived. The Aztecs had never seen a horse before the arrival of the conquistadors. To them, the Spaniards riding horses seemed like one creature with two heads, inspiring awe, confusion, and even fear during early encounters. 183. Tenochtitlan was divided like a compass. The city was divided into 4 main quadrants, each aligned with a cardinal direction and a deity. The city center, where the Templo Mayor stood, was the spiritual and political heart, believed to be the axis of the universe. 184. Aztecs made blowguns from hollowed cactus stalks. For hunting birds and small animals, they used quiet blowguns called Tlacalhuaztli, which were surprisingly accurate. Darts were often tipped with chili juice or poison, small but spicy. 185. They had a god of salt and hard work. Huixtocihuatl, the goddess of salt, was the patron of salt workers and laborious. She represented both the importance and difficulty of daily work, and was honored with offerings of white shells and salty foods. 186. They brewed fermented agave drinks. The Aztecs made pulque, a milky alcoholic drink from fermented agave sap. It was reserved for nobles, warriors, and priests, and forbidden to the young and commoners, except during certain festivals, or if you were really, really old. 187. They used a base 20 number system. The Aztecs counted using vigesimal math, based on 20s rather than 10s. This system was reflected in trade, record-keeping, and even architecture, making their mathematical knowledge surprisingly advanced for the era. 188. Aztec sculptures often showed tongues as blades. In art and temple carvings, many deities are shown with tongues shaped like knives, representing the idea that words, like blades, could draw blood, especially during rituals involving speech, poetry, or sacrifice. 189. Aztec judges were not above the law. The empire had a strict judicial system, and even judges were held accountable. If a judge was found guilty of bribery or corruption, they could face severe penalties, including death. Justice was not just symbolic, but seriously enforced. 190. They believed dying in water meant a special afterlife. People who drowned or died from water-related causes were believed to be chosen by Tlaloc, the rain god. Their souls didn't go to the underworld, they went to Tlalocan, a lush, paradise-like realm of eternal spring. 191. Aztecs had a goddess of filth and forgiveness. Her name was Tlaztetl, and while she was associated with sin, dirt, and scandal, she was also the goddess of cleansing and confession. People would pray to her when seeking to purify themselves. She represented both temptation and redemption. 192. They had symbolic hairstyles. Warriors and priests wore specific hairstyles to show rank and experience. For example, eagle warriors shaved their heads except for a long topknot, while young trainees often wore their hair in simple buns or loose styles to show inexperience. 193. Aztecs believed the world had already ended for times. In their mythology, we're living in the fifth sun, a new era following 4 previous worlds, each destroyed by jaguars, wind, fire, and floods. Every era ended in catastrophe, and the Aztecs believed their rituals kept this one alive. 194. They had specialized schools for nobles and commoners. Aztec children attended different schools based on their social class. Kamicac was for the elite, training future priests and leaders. Telpochcalli was for commoners, focusing on discipline, warfare, and service. Education was taken seriously, and included chores. 195. Aztec music used turtle shells. Yes, turtle shells. Musicians would beat them like drums in ceremonies. Alongside flutes, ocarinas, and conch shells, these instruments created a haunting, rhythmic soundscape that echoed through temples and city streets. 196. They had a beloved dog breed called the Colo. The Xoloitzcuintli, or Colo for short, was a hairless dog breed believed to guide souls through the afterlife. These dogs were considered sacred and were often buried with their owners. Bonus, they were also pretty warm to cuddle with at night. 197. Aztecs believed in dream prophecies. Dreams were taken very seriously. Priests and shamans often interpreted dreams as messages from gods or ancestors. A dream of fire might signal danger. A dream of water could mean a spiritual journey ahead. 198. Rituals were often accompanied by hallucinogens. Certain ceremonies involved consuming psychoactive plants, like morning glory seeds or mushrooms, to induce visions. These altered states were thought to connect participants directly with the gods, opening their minds to sacred truths. 199. Aztec messengers carried painted codices. Important messages were recorded in folded books called codices, filled with pictographs and symbols. Couriers carried them across vast distances to keep the empire informed, like ancient email, but with a lot more running. 200. They recycled everything, including bones. Aztecs made use of nearly every part of animals they consumed. Bones were turned into tools, awls, musical instruments, and even jewelry. Nothing went to waste. Their society was incredibly resourceful. Now that we've discovered the most unique facts and aspects of Aztec life, let's take a final journey to look at what life was like as a member of Aztec society. Listen carefully and relax. My name is Izel. I was born in Tenochtitlan, the shining city on the lake, where stone temples rise like mountains from the mist, and canals carry the whispers of our people through the dawn. I am a simple man, a Masecule, a commoner, but I take pride in my life. The gods have given me breath, corn, and family. What more could a man ask for? Let me share a day with you. Not just any day, but one that could be mine or yours, live beneath the watchful eyes of the sun god, Tanatia, and the sacred peaks that cradle our world. My wife, Xochitl, wakes before me. I hear the gentle sound of her feet against the clay floor, the hiss of water warming in the hearth. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and wet maize. She's preparing atol, our morning drink, made from ground corn and water, just as her mother did, and her mother before her. I rise slowly, wrapping myself in a woven cotton cloak, embroidered with simple geometric patterns. My body aches a bit from yesterday's labor in the chinampas, our floating gardens, but there is work to be done. Always. Before we eat, I kneel beside our tiny household altar. I whisper a prayer to Tlaloc, the god of rain, and to Sentiotl, god of maize. I sprinkle a pinch of ground copal into a clay burner, and the fragrant smoke rises in slow spirals. A small act, but meaningful. Without the favor of the gods, nothing grows. We eat quietly, seated on woven mats, patates, with the rising sun casting soft gold through the reed walls. Today, we have tamales wrapped in maize leaves, and Xochitl has added chili and beans for flavor. Our two children, Kwali and Teka, sit cross-legged, still sleepy but eager for the day. Teka is just old enough to begin lessons at Telpoch Kali, the school for common boys. He will learn to serve, to fight, and to respect. Kwali, our daughter, helps her mother around the home, and already she sings the old songs while grinding corn on the metate. By mid-morning, I step into my canoe, pushing away from our dock with a smooth motion. The canals shimmer with morning light, and dragonflies dart along the surface. Around me, others paddle silently, some toward market, some toward temple, some, like me, toward the chinampas. Our floating fields are brilliant. Rows of maize, squash, beans, they rise from matted layers of mud and reed. We pile the earth carefully, planting willow trees along the edges to keep it all from drifting. It is work, yes, but it is sacred work. The earth feeds us because we care for it. I hum a harvest song my grandfather taught me, pausing only to swat at a persistent mosquito. The sun climbs higher. Sweat beads on my brow. I smile. This is life. And life is good. By midday, I head to the Changuis, the marketplace. Tenochtitlan's market is like no other, thousands of people, each with goods to trade or sell. Cacao beans clink in small pouches, they are our currency. I carry dried fish and baskets of tomatoes to trade. The smell of the market is a dizzying swirl, roasted peppers, sweet fruit, crushed flowers, and fresh-cut herbs. You can hear flutes playing, hawkers shouting, the clatter of clay pots. I pass a Tlaquilo, a scribe, painting a codex. His hands are steady, his eyes calm, recording the movements of our world. Sometimes, I visit a curandera, a healer, to bring home herbs or ointments for aches. Today, she presses a bundle of dried marigold and says it's good luck for harvest. After the market, I pass near the Templo Mayor, the grand temple at the center of the city, the heart of Tenochtitlan, the heart of our world. It towers above us, with its 2 stairways rising side by side into the blue sky. One leading to Huitzilopochtli, our god of war and sun, the other, to Tlaloc, our god of rain and fertility. It's not a feast day, but there is always some ritual happening. Today, priests in turquoise masks climb the temple steps slowly, carefully. They carry offerings, copal smoke drifts into the air, curling like spirit threads. The drum beats slow and deep, like the heart of the city itself. I don't stay long. These moments are powerful, but I am a humble man, and the gods are great. Still, I bow my head in passing, whispering thanks. Without them, we are dust. When I return home, my children run to greet me. Kwali shows me a little clay dog she made. She says it's a kolo, the sacred hairless dog that guides souls to the afterlife. She makes him bark and laughs. The laugh of a child is a beautiful thing. It sounds like rain falling on a dry chinampa. Inside, Xochitl is kneeling beside the hearth, stirring stew. The scent is savory: maize, beans, squash, and a hint of chili. We eat together, seated close, sharing tortillas pulled fresh from the comal. We do not speak much. The day speaks for us. Afterward, Xochitl tends to her loom, weaving patterns into cloth. The designs aren't random, they carry the memory of our people, passed from mother to daughter. In each shape, there is a story. As the sun sinks, painting the sky in soft fire, I walk to the edge of the lake. The water reflects the orange and purple above, so still it feels like the world has turned upside down. I sit on the dock with Teka, my son. He asks questions about the stars, the gods, the great warriors. He wants to be an eagle warrior, brave and honorable. I place a hand on his shoulder and tell him that strength comes not just from the arms, but from the heart. That courage is often quiet, like water carving stone. The stars appear slowly, blinking into view like the eyes of ancestors watching over us. We listen to the frogs and distant drums. The smell of the lake, of earth, of fire, it calms the spirit. We return home in darkness. Xochitl has lit the fire low, and the children are already curled together, sleeping soundly under woven blankets. I kneel at our altar again and offer a final breath of prayer to the gods. I think of my father, who taught me to plant. Of my mother, who sang songs to the moon. Of my people, who walk through time with heads held high, even under the weight of life. I lay beside Xochitl and close my eyes. The city hums softly around me, its canals, its temples, its people, and the dreams of the gods drift down like feathers. This is our world. This is my life. And I am content. That will be all for now. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Background Historian. If you would like to see daily Background Historian videos to help you fall asleep, please consider subscribing. Have a swell night and sweet dreams.